Welcome back, everybody. We are going to discuss number 3 on the list of 3 biggest reasons why people fail to get started in the mobile home park game. To recap, reason number 1, ineffective strategy. Reason number 2, poor underwriting. Reason number 3, Michael, is a limiting inner game. Mobile home parks need good would-be entrepreneurs to get off the sidelines and into the game. My name is Ryan Neris. I started with nothing. No money, no network, and no experience. Over my first decade in the business, I've acquired over 80 mobile home parks spanning 4,500 lots and counting. No matter what level you're at, I can help you get started, scale, and get your business to the next level.
I'm Mike Panzolini. In my 10 years working in private equity, I've managed over 250 mobile home parks. I've spent my entire career in real estate, both personally and professionally, building complex systems and processes and leveraging data and technology to create automations in both acquisitions and operations. I can teach you the methods that the big shops use to professionalize your business.
Together, we will equip you with all the tools, wisdom, and skills that I needed to create and scale a larger business from humble beginnings.
And I'll give you that big private equity shop edge to push your business to the next level, bringing institutional tools to the individual investor. We are the 30-day mobile home park.
A limiting inner game. In other words, what's going on right here, ladies and gentlemen? First and foremost in this bucket, should not be surprising, is quite simply a fear of risk. And this is ubiquitous across all investment platforms, from crypto to stocks, bonds, whatever. We all are designed to be fearful. You could lose 100% of your invested dollar, not to mention your time, if you buy a mobile home park. And that freaks people out, and that is totally understandable. Worse, you could lose more than what you invested. It could go negative. So there's this thing called recourse debt, or a guarantor. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this, you're already doing this most likely on things like credit cards or your home mortgage. In effect, what it means is the commercial loan, the commercial lender can come after you personally if you don't pay the mortgage. What that means is you can not only lose your invested dollar, but they start coming after your cars, your house, your assets. Understandably, that causes a lot of fear, which then leads to inaction. So this is what we're going to be discussing today, which is just how to manage the thoughts in your head, because they're incredibly limiting at times.
Yeah, you could lose everything, right? That's a pretty scary thing to say out loud. This is on theme, I would say, with your previous podcast, Ryan, MHP IRL. And I know a lot of people, including me, who listened to that podcast, we're very grateful for how candid you were throughout the show. And we're going to make sure that we maintain that same theme of honesty in this podcast as well. So we'll say it out loud. You could really lose everything. Now, Ryan mentioned recourse debt. For those listeners who don't know what recourse debt is or are somewhat unfamiliar with it, it's a form of lending where if the full liability is not satisfied by the collateral of the asset itself, upon default, the lender can actually go after other assets in your portfolio, including, however unlikely, your actual primary residence or your home. This is in contrast to non-recourse debt, which means that the lender can only take the underlying asset upon default. Specifically with mobile home parks, there are some intricacies that make the asset class more susceptible to being subject to recourse debt. Think about the difference between a mobile home park and a multifamily asset. A multifamily asset is a building that was constructed and the actual building has value, as well as the land it sits on. It has real value, meaning the tangible structure itself is part of the collateral. Not to mention that a lot of the times multifamily buildings are located in a densely populated business district in a primary MSA, where the land value that the building sits on also has more value. So in contrast, a mobile home park is effectively just dirt with pipes that run underneath it and a road. And sometimes that road is not even paved. The primary income generating component of the mobile home park is not even the homes themselves, but the rental of the lots. And the land value that those lots sit on can vary dramatically based on the market, as we talked about, because a lot of the times mobile home parks are very rural areas. So the land they sit on isn't even worth as much as a lot of other real estate assets, like multifamily, as we talked about. The physical infrastructure of a park is also minimal, and it may not hold significant standalone value. So lenders see more risk in these assets from a collateral standpoint. As a result, they're often going to require recourse debt to mitigate this risk, knowing that if the deal goes sideways, the value of the underlying property is not going to be sufficient to fully recover their loan. If you want to further complicate this, think about the security of the income stream. A multifamily tenant cannot pick up his apartment and move it somewhere else like a mobile home park tenant can. Since they can potentially move their homes off of the property, they can also reduce the lot rental income overnight. And the risk profile is pretty intense for lenders for that reason, and therefore they're hesitant to offer non-recourse debt. And instead, they seek personal guarantees or additional collateral from the borrower to compensate for these uncertainties. So Ryan, as someone who has 80 plus parks, maybe you can touch on what your experience has been with recourse debt to date.
I'm happy to take a deeper dive too. So it's rare that actually ever happens. There was a story that a friend of mine who's a lender told me about a situation where the mortgage was on a marina stopped getting paid because the county built a dam and all of a sudden completely flooded the property. So the actual parcel of land was now completely submerged and the marina was effectively completely unusable. And even then, the bank did not execute on the recourse piece. They worked with the gentleman and they found a solution. And memory serves, the gentleman actually came out better because eminent domain ended up happening and the county ended up paying X, Y, and Z, and the guy actually came out on top. When I talk to my lender friends about full-on recourse, so again, that means you are a guarantor, you are signing over your IRAs, you are signing over all of your assets, your home, your cars, everything. If you don't pay the mortgage, usually they will work with you, they being the bank. Usually they will, and usually they're not going to throw the book at you unless you've done something wrong. So there's a term called bad boy carve-outs that is often thrown around on things like CMBS debt. So that's the big fancy dancy commercial backed mortgage securities debt, Fannie Freddie loans, the governmental loans. They all have some form or another of a bad boy carve out. And that's just a term to just mean as long as you don't have malintent, you'll be A-okay. And while that's not specifically in the writing that they're only going to come after you if you had malintent, you did something illegal, you stole money, whatever it may be, on a full-on guarantor recourse type situation, oftentimes banks aren't going to really more have that on the books to check a box on their end because they're just trying to do their job and move on. So it's really not as scary as it might sound. But again, Michael, this episode is about overcoming inner game, and that's not an impossibility when you sign on the dotted line, so to speak. And that really freaks people out.
If you've gone to business school and gotten a business degree, You take business law, and one of the first things that they tell you is that even if you have an LLC, even if you have a corporation, and technically your personal assets are shielded, as soon as you do something fraudulent, that's no longer the case. But in this case, it's not just about whether you do something fraudulent. You're signing on the dotted line, handing over any and all assets that you might have should something terrible happen, like a natural disaster or a massive exodus from your market. Knowing this, some people may be asking the question, how do you mitigate that risk? The first way is diligence, and the second way is scale. Diligence is just doing your homework to uncover any potential time bombs at the property before you sign on the dotted line. And we'll touch more on that later. Scale is having a large enough portfolio that the negative outcome of one asset is mitigated by the positive outcomes of the other assets in the portfolio. At a private equity shop, sometimes we do sign recourse debt, but should something happen to one of our assets, we also have billions of dollars of assets that we could liquidate in a pinch and then pay back the lender using those proceeds. Worst case scenario, it would be a blip on the radar. In prior episodes, we kind of discussed economies of scale and how it leads to a portfolio premium. Risk mitigation is another strong example of why institutions and private equity funds like to purchase portfolios rather than single assets, and why they're willing to pay more for that portfolio. Unlike private equity shops, new investors, like potentially you, don't typically have the capital to buy these large portfolios right off the bat. And so you can't spread the risk amongst multiple assets like a private equity shop could. So therefore, it's important we say recourse debt is a risk for new investors. It's unlikely that something will trigger the bank to go after your personal assets, but it's definitely something to consider. Ultimately, though, if you want to be an investor, you have to be comfortable with taking educated risk. You have to be comfortable with the investments you're making based on your due diligence, which means being that detective and finding any of those killer issues before you purchase the park. That's why we're here, though, right? Because we're trying to equip you with that knowledge so you can be an effective detective.
Look, uncertainty is scary. Susan Jeffers has a phenomenal book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And in this book, right out of the gate, a bit of a spoiler alert, she says that you can distill fear down to feeling like you can't handle it. So what if a storm hits? What if new legislation is passed? What if the market changes? What if 3D homes disrupt the asset class? There's a reason uncertainty is scary, and Susan Jeffers argues it's because ultimately when you distill it down to its most rudimentary form, that fear is based in feeling like you can't handle it. So let's shift gears a little bit to another big inner game piece that you have to fight through beyond just fear. It's focusing on the wrong priorities. Michael, you and I've talked many times about, oftentimes there are a lot of people who just never take action, but more often than not, the action takers take the wrong action. So one big thing you and I've talked about many times, specifically under this category, is people who focus too much on what they like to do versus what they need to do. So we've mentioned before this idea, a lot of financial minds are attracted to the mobile home park space, and financial people are comfortable in Microsoft Excel doing underwriting. There is a time in a place to do underwriting. However, it quickly becomes a diminishing return on your time when you spend an extra 5 hours on an Excel file when 5 hours ago it was good enough, right? A pro forma is a guess. You need to have that guess. You need to go pitch banks and investors. But beyond that, it starts to become a crutch. And if you like to do something and you're good at doing something, in your brain, you are going to convince yourself that that is an important thing to do. And worse, your brain's going to reward you for that with dopamine. So your brain is going to reward you with, wow, I'm being productive, but are you? Or are you just being active? It's in a weird way a form of laziness. So again, you, the investor, the listener, need to be aware of that. And you need to overcome that. And you need to have really brutal and honest conversations with yourself about that. So if you listen to my former podcast, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, Ian Tudor and I talked about our partnership when we first got started. One huge benefit to having a business partner who's there in the trenches with you, they can help hold you accountable to, again, doing what you need to do versus what you like to do. I was guilty, by the way, up front. I was not a finance person, even though I got my MBA and had all the finance classes. I am a former salesperson, so I spend way too much time cold calling and networking. Not that that's a bad thing. When you're starting out, listen, when you're starting out, you can't spend enough time in any one bucket. And that's a really hard thing for folks who are brand new is they need to be building out a network. They need to be cold calling. They need to be talking to brokers. They need to be underwriting. They need to be doing all these things. And you really can't do enough of anything because you got to build your systems and processes. But as you spend more time, and for the listeners who are already in the game, you just have to remember that lower value comes in time from a diminishing return on time invested in something. In other words, underwriting is a high value activity until it's not anymore, until now the higher and better use of your time is cold calling or doing due diligence or whatever is next. Michael, what are some of the things you and I have talked about over the time we've known each other?
Yeah, so much to unpack there, Ryan. And I feel personally attacked by what you just said. I'm going to let it go. This is a great lesson that I had to learn the hard way. I think our first conversation ever, you said something like, you don't have a knowledge issue, you don't have a finance issue, and you don't have a skills issue. Your issue is confidence and inaction. And what you realized right away about me, Ryan, is something that you've probably seen in so many mentees, which is a fear of taking action. And like you said, this is based on the idea that if something bad happens along the way, that you won't be able to handle it. When you met me, Ryan, I was, at least in my opinion, doing an incredible job underwriting. I had an awesome model built, which actually is the model that we offer to our students in our course. And I remember spending days and weeks building it and perfecting it and making it the best model I'd ever built. And it really didn't need any more bells and whistles at that point. And yet I would always go back and find a reason to build it out even more. But what was worse than that was that I would look at all these deals all the time and I would use that perfected model to underwrite them. And when I underwrote those deals, my model would often point to stellar returns. So you would think that I would have purchased those deals, but guess what? I just wasn't doing it. And the reason being is that I would tend to go back into those models and toggle some of the inputs until on paper, something was actually wrong with the asset. In that way, I was able to justify to myself not moving forward with the deal because I could say, well, actually, I'm being smart. In reality, what I was deliberately doing was sabotaging deals so that I didn't have to take the risk because it was a fear of inaction. So to conclude that thought, if you're doing what you're good at, then it is potentially, as Ryan said, covert laziness, but it's also potentially a risk avoidance behavior. Not just investment risk, but the risk that you might be really bad at some of those other necessary activities. And from my experience, most people avoid doing things they stink at because who likes being bad at anything, right? Nobody likes doing things they're bad at. Honestly, that's a huge problem as an entrepreneur. It's going to be something you encounter again and again. If you want to be successful, you had better be willing to put the time in to do things you're bad at because one, you can't possibly be good at everything. Nobody is. And two, you need to do everything. This is in contrast to what people say because often they say that you can hire out the things that you aren't great at. The answer to that is, yeah, if it doesn't kill all your profitability, then sure. Yeah, but I have news for you. You can't afford to hire out most tasks at the outset. So you have to be super comfortable working hard on things that you're uncomfortable doing. Said simply, get comfortable being uncomfortable for the first few years. Ryan speaks from a ton of experience with regards to building a company, building systems and operations, and having to do everything all at once. Right now, however, Ryan is a place where he has standard operating procedures built out, and he's reaping the benefits of all the years of hard work that he put in at the outset, creating those systems. Ryan will tell you that he still works incredibly hard, right, Ryan? Yeah, the dude, no joke, is on a plane, train, or automobile every single time that I talk to him. However, I think he will also tell you, and from what I've seen at least, he is very much able to enjoy time with his family now. At this point, he's able to hire people to do some of the things that he either doesn't want to do or thinks someone else can do better than him, whatever the case may be, but that's not by accident. That's because of the upfront price he paid building those systems and processes in this business. And that upfront price was time spent doing things that he didn't always love to do. Back to me quickly. I'm about 6 years behind Ryan in my own entrepreneurial journey. And so I can tell you firsthand that absolutely nothing has changed in the world of being an entrepreneur since he started. In my investment company, I'm currently handling all three legs of the real estate stool: acquisitions, capital raising, and operations. And this part takes up like 60 to 80 hours of my week. And on top of that, Ryan and I are building out an educational platform for mobile home parks that takes up, another 20 to 40 hours of my week. So in that 100 hours a week, I'm going to actually take out a list and quickly list the skills that you need in order to run these businesses. Of those 35 skills, I'm really good at like 4 of them. And about 50% of them, I am significantly mediocre at. And then the remainder of them, I would say that I'm pretty bad at. However, even the ones that I am mediocre or awful at, I still do them. It just takes me a lot more time to do them in order to get them right. And that's why I work 100 hours a week. If you want to be an entrepreneur, this is the mindset you have to have. It's going to be a gut punch every single time you have to do something you're bad at, but it'll also be fun and exciting when you improve the skill, which inevitably you will because you're going to be spending so much time doing it. So to take this full circle, the point here is that I used to spend a lot of time on what I knew and what I was good at, which was underwriting. But you need to understand exactly when that point of diminishing returns occurs. And instead of underwriting the same deal for the third time like me, send an LOI and get the deal under contract, and then start building those diligence skills that you're absolutely going to need in order to close on that first park.
I had an episode about this specifically on my podcast called Manager Foursquare, where effectively I talk about the idea of the 4x4 or 2x2 matrix of like to do, don't like to do on one axis, and on the other axis, good at and not good at. And obviously we all want to spend time doing things that we like to do, that we are good at. But unfortunately, especially when we start out, there is a good chunk of our time that needs to go to stuff that you are not good at and you do not like to do. So you just have to remember, you have to best your own psychology there, because it's not just about taking action. You have to take the correct action. Speaking of action, for anybody like me who loves the self-help books and the hustle culture videos and whatnot, it's quite simply failure to take action. This is incredibly self-explanatory. If you don't pick up the phone, if you don't put the effort in, it's just not going to happen for you. I've talked about this many a time on my former podcast. I've met so many people who are great people, very well-intentioned, very good souls, who would be fantastic landlords and entrepreneurs who just don't do it. And for one reason or another, and if you look at their life, they are, for all intents and purposes, very successful people. And it could be fear, like we mentioned earlier. It could be laziness. It could be escapism, right? If you're stuck in a job and you absolutely hate it, dreaming about entrepreneurship or passive income or insert whatever buzzword or concept will result in a temporary relief to the trap that you're in. And while that might feel good in the moment, that's not productive. You actually have to go and do something. So when push comes to shove, you just have to jump in the deep end at some point.
Yeah, the overarching theme here is that there is a price that you pay for inaction, right? Especially for you new investors who are trying to get that first park. Every single day that you don't have a park or you haven't gone through a closing process is another day that you aren't learning how to operate a park or how to close on a park effectively. Ryan says it again and again. It's much more difficult to go from 0 goose egg to 1 park than it is to get from 1 to 10 parks. And why is that? Well, after you get that first park, you've kind of figured out how it's done. And that initial fear is kind of behind you because you say to yourself, I've done this before. I can do it again. You have the confidence to continue going because you've done it already. And once you get that first rep in and you operate your park effectively, now you're going to become intimately familiar with the ins and outs of this real estate investment and mobile home park investment specifically. You'll have the benefit of experience to draw on. And this is when I guarantee you'll start speaking with more confidence about mobile home parks, like it's second nature, like it's talking about your spouse. When that happens, that's when the investor dollars are going to start rolling in because you're going to sound like a subject matter expert. That momentum is going to carry you forward. You've created momentum now, which is a concept I stole from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he describes Newton's first law of inertia and a ball sitting stationary and how you have to give it a big push to get that ball rolling.
So let's do a quick recap and then hit the last major bullet point under inner game. So obviously you need to take action because inaction is not going to get you anywhere. But it's not enough to take action. You have to take the right action. And fear will control you if you let it. The last piece of this is quitting when times get tough. I've mentioned earlier that it took me over a year to buy my first mobile home park. But that wasn't enough because Ian and my first mobile home park did not put money in the bank account. In fact, I'm pretty sure we lost money, especially when you look at how much time I invested in that versus the yield that came out of it. We didn't get full time until about our 2-year anniversary. And even then, that was 3 mobile home parks in. Now, albeit we were starting with nothing, we had to make some major sacrifices to even really get started. But the reason why I bring this up specifically is because the first difficult period you are going to hit is the time that you go from 0 mobile home parks to 1 mobile home park. That is your most vulnerable time, bar none. I've seen plenty of people do this, fail to do this over a decade and growing, going on a decade and growing as of this recording. And I will say it now and I will say it again. Most people fail. Their mobile home park journey dies before they buy their first. If you can hurdle that obstacle, you are in an elite group of people, whereas I believe strongly over 95% of folks never even buy that first one. So that's your most vulnerable moment. And it's not really a moment, it's a period. For me, it was 16 months. But then it doesn't get easier. Because again, for my first mobile home park to my second, which was the period of plus or minus, I think it was 4-ish months, there was a whole episode I did on my old podcast called Perseverance, specifically about that period of time, that difference between 1 mobile home park and 2, where Ian almost quit. I had to talk him off the ledge, so to speak, and I did. And then within an hour or two, our second mobile home park called us back, which is just kind of fate in a way, coincidence or fate or karma, whatever you want to call it. And we had our second one. And it's just funny how that happened. But had that not happened in that moment, that would have been another really tough time where we would have doubted if we could ever have really gotten this started. And it's not really fair to say that time period is 1 mobile home park to 2. It's really one mobile home park to critical mass. And what I mean by critical mass is that you have enough cash flow coming in to continue to do this indefinitely, assuming no catastrophes happen. Those are your two biggest moments of vulnerability that you have to figure out how to not quit. And even if it takes years, I mean, I know plenty of folks who took years to get involved in this space, and they eventually did, and they're thankful they stuck with it. Those are your two most vulnerable time periods. The next is when you're in and operations start to get tough. Y'all, operations will make you want to quit. I'm an operations junkie. I love it. I do. It's what I meant to do in my life. There are plenty of moments that I can tell you, one of which was the hardest moment I've ever experienced. And that was a mere 2 months ago from this recording. And I seriously thought about quitting. Now, I didn't. I mentally got over it myself, and we're fine now. But this happens to everybody. Steve Jobs talks about this, for crying out loud. You have to love it. You have to love operations, or you have to partner with someone who does, because it will make you want to quit. Mobile home parks are not easy. They're not. Sure, just because you're not going to get a phone call in an all-tenant unknown community that, hey, my roof caved in or my toilet's running, that doesn't mean it's not incredibly difficult and thankless to run these properties. And I can hear in the back of some of the listeners' mind, yeah, but I'm going to hire a third-party management company, so this is for naught. Well, I have some unfortunate news for you. Third-party management companies need managing. They have different priorities. They have different incentives than you. Sometimes they're going to be great. Sometimes they're going to make you go crazy. And that's not just third-party managers in the mobile home park space. That's third-party managers in all sorts of different asset classes. I have friends in many different asset classes, and they say the same thing. Look, maybe operations isn't your slice of the cake, so to speak. Maybe you can grow into it, maybe not. But you better have somebody on your team who does, because it's going to get so unbelievably difficult that it's going to make you want to quit at some point in time. And I have seen many an outfit close shop, profitable outfit, close shop because they can't handle it. So again, you either have to partner with someone who loves operations, or you have to develop a love for it yourself, because you are not going to outsource this, at least not in perpetuity. And even if you achieve that somehow, you're still going to have to manage the third-party managers, because again, their incentives are different than you.
People will come into this space for a number of reasons, but a lot of people will come into this space to make a ton of money, which is, in my opinion, a really bad reason. There are a lot of ways to make a ton of money. So I suggest that you first figure out which way you like best and then pursue that venture, instead of just saying, oh, mobile home parks will make me a lot of money, so I'll do that. When I was in corporate America, I made pretty good money, but it just didn't fulfill me. It wasn't fun, and it didn't bring me happiness. So I can tell you from personal experience, as can Ryan, that money alone won't bring fulfillment. And we could discuss countless examples of people with high incomes or high net worths who are still incredibly unhappy. So it's important to focus on finding something you enjoy, not just something that generates a ton of cash. Otherwise, you're going to be really disappointed once you acquire all these parks and now you don't really feel fulfilled, because you may have just bought yourself a job that you don't like, right? That'll result in burnout and ultimately make you want to quit or start all over again, or lose money because you aren't engaged and doing your best work. Ultimately, find something you are passionate about and then pursue that thing with passion, and the money's going to come later. And then also, speaking to Ryan's point on third-party managers, in private equity, I made a career managing third-party managers. That was literally my job. I oversaw the third-party manager who oversaw our mobile home park assets on the ground. And they were great operators, and our assets performed really well. But there were things that, as owners, we wanted those managers to focus on, and sometimes they just wouldn't get done, or they would take way too long to do. And to be completely honest, it wasn't the fault of the third-party operator. There was just a lot on their plate. They had a lot of assets under management. However, it illustrates that your priorities are not always going to be the priorities of a third-party manager. Therefore, managing an asset yourself through your own team is the best way to ensure that the asset will perform according to the stated business plan and to your priorities. There are ways, if you are definitely going to hire a third-party manager, to mitigate the misalignment of incentives. You can create a long-term incentive plan for your third-party manager, requiring them to also make an investment in the deal prior to the closing, and let's call it 5 to 10% of the deal. This aligns their compensation with the performance of the asset, meaning the better that the asset performs, the more they get paid, similar to if you were the GP in a deal. In this way, you're ensuring that they actually want the asset to perform just as well as you do, so that A, they get compensated for their hard work, and then B, they don't lose the invested capital that they have in the deal. Remember that 5 to 10% I mentioned, by neglecting the asset. They are effectively your business partner now. So this also comes with a downside, right? If you're partnering with these guys for the life of the investment, you had better like them just like you would any other partner, because you are stuck with them unless they really mess up. And if they really mess up, things can get sticky. So even with a long-term incentive plan in place, you have a larger portion of the investment as the owner. And so by default, you are really going to be more invested in the performance of the asset. So just keep that in mind. Regardless of the long-term incentive plan, you're still going to be more invested in that asset than your capital partner or your third-party manager. So just to recap, in terms of all the things we just covered, which were 1, focusing on the wrong priorities, 2, fear of risk, 3, failure to take action, and 4, quitting when times get tough. Ryan, what are some of the solutions that you've developed as a response to these obstacles that we just talked about? And once you're done, I'll jump in after you.
Yeah, first and foremost, you got to develop fear management. So as of this recording, I closed on my 84th property yesterday, and I am still fearful, even though we just closed and the money's been wired and everything's been signed. I've been calling residents personally just to make sure a smooth transition. I'm sure I'm going to get an email, but employees at some point like, hey, can you stop it? I want to make sure that everyone knows in this new acquisition that we are here as a team. I'm one of the team members. We are here as a team and we're here to serve. And I want to make sure personally, even though I have closer to 100 mobile home parks now than 0, I want to make sure it goes well. Not just financially, also just because I have fears that things are just not going to go smoothly. And I constantly am thinking about my clients, which are the individuals living in these communities. So yeah, I still give fear to this day when I close. And I bet my entire career, I will still be fearful at the closing table. Like I'm making a mistake or I'm going to do something wrong or something terrible is going to happen. The difference between me today versus me when I got started is I am much better at managing my own fear. I do not suppress my fear. That's a big thing of old where you just kind of shove my dad's generation, God bless, they basically incentivized to drop it down like the John Wayne style. You feel sad or scared or anything weak, you just bury that. And that's just, you may disagree, listener, but I think that's wrong. I would rather be blunt and loud about it, about how I am feeling in this moment. It drives my wife nuts, especially when I'm driving, because I might have a thing to say about someone on the road, but then 5 minutes later, it's like nothing ever happens. And we laugh about it now, but the truth is that's my strategy. My strategy is get out all my emotions, be loud with your emotions. Get it on the table so you can deal with it. Don't suppress it. And fear is no different. Fear is no different. I always try to talk through my fear. That's how I've learned to best my own inner psychology. Because again, this whole portion is specifically about besting your own psychology. And again, your fear is always going to be there, or at least you need to mentally prepare for it to always be there.
Yeah, I agree. For a lot of us, I would say it's the fear that something is going to go wrong, that there is some unknown that we aren't going to catch. And as we touched on earlier, that if something bad does happen, we won't be able to handle it. So how are we going to mitigate that fear when you're closing on a mobile home park? In my opinion, the answer is always doing good diligence, because you can kind of erase most of that fear by eliminating unknowns throughout your diligence period. Because the way that I break it down is fear can be either rational or irrational. Rational fear is your brain alerting you to the fact that, hey, maybe you haven't done enough diligence surrounding this item, or maybe you have, and maybe you just need to go revisit it and suppress that fear voice that's scaring you. So ask yourself in this case, is the thing causing you fear associated with a larger risk that you just haven't vetted yet? And if it is, then go mitigate that risk with more diligence. Likely what that will result in is the fear dissipating to some degree. Rational fear can also be fear of the unknown. If there are risks to an investment that you are completely unaware of, and you don't know what you don't know, which is most of us starting out, this can lead to a lot of anxiety. So how is this type of fear of the unknown mitigated? The first way is through self-education. So kudos to you for listening to this podcast and listening to Ryan's MHP IRL and other podcasts like it. Education is for sure the best way to mitigate the rational fear of the unknown, because the answers to the unknowns is always knowledge. However, I think the second and equally important way to mitigate rational fear of the unknown is through mentorship. I think finding a mentor is the most underrated approach to mitigating fear, because it helps you level up in any endeavor. When I was in a corporate job, I was always scrolling social media for escapism, and I was constantly spammed with gurus who were trying to sell me something and who were all claiming that I could escape from the 9-to-5 rat race and secure financial freedom. And I have to say, that really put me off to mentorship, because it felt very salesy instead of what I thought mentorship should be, which was building a personal relationship and helping me grow. And so I was so sick of hearing the words financial freedom and escape your 9-to-5 shouted at me by people who I knew were trying to make a quick buck. So if you're sick of hearing those ads like I was, I get it. I hear you and your doubts about mentorship, because I had the same doubts about mentorship. What I'm telling you to do is not what you've seen on social media. What I'm telling you to do is to go out and find someone who you look up to and who you align with from a personality, from a virtue, and from a goals standpoint. And then pursue that person as a mentor, which means just ask them if they have some time to teach you about mobile home parks and then help you navigate some of the challenges that you're going to face in your investment journey. In my opinion, getting a mentor is the number one way to mitigate the fear of the unknown, especially when you get to the stage where you're developing a strategy, putting parks under contract, and entering that diligence phase. Because if you have someone who you can call on to review a deal and a mentor who, based on his experience, can tell you what you have done well and what you haven't quite explored enough, that's going to eliminate all of the unknown risk that is causing you fear and could potentially save you from making a costly error. People downplay the importance of mentors, in my opinion, because they believe that they can do everything on their own, or they want to be able to do everything on their own. But that's not the case, right? Because they don't understand the value of having someone in their corner who has done it all before. You have the fear because you don't have the confidence yet. And you don't have the confidence yet because you haven't gotten your reps in. So bring in a coach who has gotten their reps in and can help you get your reps in, and then can also help you adjust your form along the way. This is going to be the best way to develop confidence and eliminate that rational fear. So that's my advice for rational fear. And of course, we mentioned the other type of fear, which is irrational fear, which is just kind of anxiety creeping up about everything that can go wrong. My advice for irrational fear is that nothing worth doing in life is going to be without risk. So irrational fear will crop up now and again. And my response to it is generally to acknowledge the feeling and then allow it to pass by digging back into the work. If you let that feeling linger, it's going to grow. So don't feed it. Like when you are meditating, acknowledge the fear and let it pass. You need to be emotionally strong to be an entrepreneur. I guarantee it. And the reason most fail is because they don't push through those difficult moments or allow the rational fear to pass through them. They let it overtake them and then paralyze them. If you do this enough times, slowly the fear slows and it won't have as much control over you because you'll develop emotional IQ and you'll have the confidence to just keep going.
We said it earlier, develop confidence. That's what it all comes down to. It's easier to jump off the high dive if you're afraid of heights. When you have confidence in your ability to swim, your ability to execute the dive, it's no different. I know what I can do and I know my limitations, and I've had months in due diligence and pre-closing to sort through it. So at closing table, it's more of a social event. So yeah, however you got to go through your process. So I may even go against what I just said, Michael, and say, do suppress it. I don't know if that works for you, suppress your emotions long enough to get through the closing. But at some point in time, whether you deal with your emotions, manage them, get better at it, suppress it, whatever it is that you do in your process, you have to take action. You have to best your own psychology and take that action, which leads us into the next solution, which is improve prioritization. Quite simply, be brutally honest, whether that's you have a business partner or employees, or you are strong enough mentally to be brutally honest with yourself about how to do things like avoid the fun activities that have either little value to begin with or have a sharp drop in diminishing returns on time invested after a certain threshold. You gotta identify and execute based on that. Now, me personally, I'll share what works for me. I am a morning guy. Once I'm awake and have my coffee, I'm in the zone. If you've ever tried to book a call with me, you will know what I'm going to say right now, which is you are not getting me on the phone in the morning. Won't happen. That's my productive time. Once the afternoon hits, forget it. After 5 p.m., my brain turns off. I've studied myself for long enough to be mindful enough to know where my productive zones are. And as a result, I can then take the not good at, don't want to do activities that I need that willpower and book it in the morning. And then my fun activities, the ones that I'm good at and I want to do, like networking, phone calls, I can do that in the evenings or late afternoons. So I have kind of hacked my own schedule to overcome this potential prioritization issue. So in short, what you really need to do is you need to figure out a way to develop that willpower to muscle through the not so fun activities that you know in your heart you need to do. You've got to be brutally honest with yourself and do yourself a favor and hack your own schedule to get those not fun activities out of the way when you have that willpower, so you can focus on the activities you want to do that are indeed productive when you have a little bit less willpower.
In terms of prioritization, aside from just scheduling the stuff you don't like or aren't great at for when you have the most energy to do it, how do you actually know what to prioritize when you were brand new to a space like mobile home park investing? Let me tell you a quick story. When I was new to the mobile home park industry, I was completely lost. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of nuances to this asset type that do not really translate well from other types of real estate assets. So even if you're coming into this with a knowledge of other types of real estate, there are about 10,000 things that I promise you won't know about mobile home park investing. When I learned real estate financial modeling, I had studied multifamily, commercial retail, and office, And I never gave any thought to mobile home parks or storage or senior living, some of those alternative assets, until I joined the portfolio management team that covered those specific asset types. Of course, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. That was 5 years ago. And I was feeling around in the dark, trying to understand this asset type without any education outside of being thrown into the fire and the occasional explanation from my boss, who was at some points annoyed that I kept asking things of him. And I can tell you that's a terrible way to learn, because a lot of people will say, you learn by doing. I think that's probably true, but I think with a caveat, it's best to have a baseline education so that you can focus on gaining experience rather than trying to retain every single vocab word that sellers, brokers, and lenders are rapid firing at you. Ryan and I are going to repeat this a million times. Education through podcasts like this one and other ones, and through courses if you are serious about learning in a more controlled environment with milestones that you can follow. This is the number one hurdle to breaking into the space. The second biggest hurdle is experience. Ryan talked a lot about knowing what to prioritize. And I know for the newbies out there listening, it's definitely difficult for someone just starting out to determine what you need to prioritize. Unfortunately, a lot of the knowledge of what to prioritize is going to come from experience. And experience is something that you either have or you do not have. It can only be acquired by doing the actual thing. So no matter how many books you read or courses you take or podcasts you listen to, if you want to also have experience on your side as a new investor, you're either going to have to just dive in and accept some risk related to inexperience, or you'll find a mentor like we talked about before who's going to bridge that experience gap for you. So again, the two things that you need to focus on are education and experience. On a future episode, Ryan and I will talk about the importance of bridging the gap with mentors and also talk about how to find one. But for now, suffice it to say that a mix of knowledge and experience are the perfect recipe for taking decisive and driving action in your mobile home park investing journey. So go out there and get your education, go out there and get your experience, and I guarantee you're going to be in a better place than you were before.
You got to action on your priorities. It's that simple. You have to find a way to jump in the deep end and start swimming. You got to formulate a plan. You have to be brutally honest, whether you can do that yourself or you have a business partner or a mentor or all of the above. You got to formulate a plan that's effective and you got to stick to it. And you have to just absolutely be stingy with your time, especially when you're starting out, because when you're starting out, in theory, you could be in one lane and still not have enough time to accomplish everything you need to accomplish. Hence why it took me over a year, Ian and I, over a year to buy our first one. There's just too much to do. So you have to be brutal with it and you have to find a way to hold yourself accountable throughout that process. But enough about that. I want to end this solutions category with you have to love what you do. So I mentioned Steve Jobs earlier. Specifically, the quote is from Steve Jobs, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Don't settle." Steve Jobs. Steve has tons of great quotes about loving what it is that you do. And if you like Mike Rowe of Dirty Jobs, he talks about developing a passion for something. So it may not be that you like football, but maybe you're not athletic. And so it's something you really enjoy, but that hobby doesn't really ever materialize into something you can do professionally. Sometimes you have to pick something, and through time and mastery, you develop a passion for it. And to Steve Jobs' point, you're going to quit if you don't. Steve Jobs went through it, man. You can say some things about that guy on a personal level, but he went through it. and found his way back because he truly loved what he did. So for me personally, I've had my life threatened. I had a whole episode about that on my former podcast. I've had, honestly, what's bothered me even more than that is when my employees have their lives threatened. I have a recklessness about it. I have a fierce loyalty to anybody who works with me, partners, employees, tenants, whatever. I want to keep people safe, and it gets me anytime someone wants to hurt someone. But my love has kept me in, and without love, you're gonna quit. There were plenty of times before I bought my first mobile home park that I probably should have quit. That if I wasn't truly in love with this asset class, I would have quit. I looked at over 100 businesses to start before I found mobile home park, and I started 3. Those 3 went nowhere. And you could poke holes in it all you want about why those 3 businesses never got anywhere. And I certainly have great reasons as to why they didn't go anywhere. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't love any of those 3. I did love mobile home parks, and that helped me fight through to the other side. As Marcus Aurelius said, the author Ryan Holiday brings up, the obstacle is the way. The obstacle becomes the way. When you truly love it, when you're a true entrepreneur, the obstacle that doesn't have an apparent solution, that's going to be very hard, that's going to be very tough, that's going to be very uncertain and very scary. The thought process and the action process and the prioritization process around getting around that obstacle becomes the way to guide you forward. So the only other thing I would say there, Michael, and then I want you to hop in here, man, because I can't wait to hear what you have to say, but without love, you'll eventually find your way out. And to Ian Tudor, very close friend of mine, former business partner who has found his way out, he started with a love, and that love eventually materialized itself in another asset class within real estate. That's okay too. If you start down this mobile home park path and you do well, he and I did some really cool things together. We helped a lot of people. There are mobile home parks that would not be mobile home parks today. They would have been bulldozed if Ian and I were not there and didn't apply our skills and our time to get it to the other side. He created a lot of value, Ian did, and did a lot of great things. And his love waned, or his love materialized itself in another asset class. He was just wrong. It wasn't mobile home parks. It happened to be something else. All of this to say, Mike, it's okay if you only stay in the mobile home park space for a couple of years. You can still come in and do really great things, make a little bit of money, have a win for everybody around if you come in for only a little bit of time. But no matter if you're here for a short period of time or a long period of time, you gotta love it.
Yeah. And one of the great things about real estate in general is that there's investment cycles. So you'll typically have, from the time that you purchase the asset, an additional 3 to 7 years in your investment cycle for any given asset type, dependent on the complexity of the business plan, which means that after that period, you can sell the asset. Like any business, you can first build it to significant revenue and strong operating performance. And then if you want to sell it off after that amount of time, you can sell it off, and then you can utilize all the skills that you've learned and translate that to another business. Whether that's real estate or an entirely different field is up to you. So if you find that your passion for mobile home parks is waning after a few years, look at it this way. All those skills you built are now transferable. So go find something else that you're passionate about. There's also a big difference between being, 1, passionate about something, and 2, enjoying every second of that thing, no matter what. Not everything is fun and exciting. And in the world we live in of instant gratification, people want to jump into things and have it be easy for them right off the bat. But building a business, while it's fun, it's also really not so fun at times. As a business owner, you're going to get to experience this full spectrum of emotions that are otherwise suppressed in a corporate job. Business owners often feel these higher highs than any corporate employee ever will. But those high highs are also the absolute value of the very low lows that you experience as an entrepreneur. So ask yourself the question before diving in as an entrepreneur. Do you accept that large spectrum of emotion? And if the answer is no, and you would rather leave your work at your desk every day at 6 p.m. and not think about it over the weekend, maybe you're just not as passionate about being an entrepreneur, or at least you're not as passionate about building the business that you're considering building. So I recently started learning how to surf, and I think it's a microcosm of what it's like to learn how to be an entrepreneur. When you're first learning how to surf, before you get up on that first wave, you're just getting crushed again and again by breaking waves that make you feel like a sock in a laundry machine. And there's not really much fun about that feeling of failing over and over again. However, if you want to be good at surfing, you have to find the fun in just being out there and giving the effort to get up on the board for that first time and then every time thereafter. You have to find the cold water invigorating. You have to find the strength of character and sense of self in that solitude and loneliness. And you have to be excited by the risk of not knowing the depth of the water you're in. Quite frankly, it wasn't really until I actually stood up for the first time and caught that first wave that I realized, wow, this is incredible. And so what that speaks to is that you have to give it time to gain that mastery in anything you're doing before you can really say one way or another, I love this, or I don't like this at all. There's going to be times where you have to push through this uncomfortable feeling of, I'm not good at this yet. But if you are finding joy in the little wins every single day to get better and better, and find yourself passionately speaking about the topic and being drawn to it, that's how you know you are passionate about something before you're even good at it. And so I think something else to consider is whether you are running towards mobile home park investment because it's something you're passionate about, or instead, whether you're trying to escape a burning building that is your corporate job, and this is the first emergency exit door that you found. Make sure you have taken some time to at least stay in your corporate job and explore all of your options outside of it before deciding on one of those emergency exits. In that way, you're not taking that first door, that second door, but you're looking behind as many doors as possible to really determine the best path forward for you. And you're taking stock of your life and what you want from it. And at this point, you're going to hopefully realize, okay, this is the direction I want to go in. Because despite getting crushed by waves in cold water, you're finding that the process of learning about the topic is invigorating. And you believe that if you keep pursuing this topic, you're going to start riding a ton of waves and you're going to love it. And so maybe now with renewed confidence, you paddle out even further and you leave the shoreline, aka your job, behind because you tested the waters. And now you're committing to now learning to surf the big waves because you have the confidence in your passion for this endeavor. And so this is super important. If someone asks you why you're building a mobile home park portfolio, it should be something like, because I believe in the need for affordable housing and I love the idea of building a community, or I love the idea of building operations surrounding real estate because it's something I'm passionate about, instead of, I want to be a millionaire. That indicates passion instead of just the desire to be rich. And when people do what they love and reach fulfillment, the money's going to follow because you're going to get really good at the thing you love. And you're going to find yourself in opportunities where people want to give you a lot of money to do what you're good at. And you're going to want to take that money and do the thing because you're not just good at it, but you're also passionate about it too.
Hopefully this list Michael and I have provided you of what not to do steers you in the right direction of what to do. If you have an ineffective strategy, be different. If you have poor underwriting, be effective. If you are struggling with the inner game piece, develop strength. Next up, ladies and gentlemen, we want to go deeper into some of the topics we covered today. Specifically, I want to spend a good chunk of time on this idea of overpriced deals because it touches on everything that we talked about over these top 3 reasons. Obviously, underwriting, inner game 2, and ineffective strategies, because again, you could just be the highest bidder and then be the overpayer. We feel like there's a lot of nuance there that needs to be addressed. So again, you can properly underwrite, and more importantly, you can compete. Now, Michael and I, we're going to likely revisit a lot of what we covered in these 3 parts here. As, look, simply identifying these pitfalls, it's not going to be enough for you to just truly combat and best these roadblocks. But this has been undeniably the best place for Michael and I to kick off this podcast, is with the biggest 3 pitfalls, biggest 3 reasons why people fail, because so many things are predicated based off of these main 3s. I also want to take a minute to reiterate the goal of our podcasts. Again, Michael and I come from 2 very different backgrounds, and we bring some pretty awesome tools to the table that for the most part, we're going to give away 100% for free, because our goal is to improve the reputation of this asset class. Our goal is to be the change we want to see in the world. And our idea of doing that, it goes beyond mobile home parks. It's affordable housing in general. We believe that there are a limited number, because this is true, a limited number of landowners. And while you could argue all day long that legislation needs to change, or law needs to change, or philosophy needs to change, fine. But laws don't get changed quickly. This is something we can do today to make a difference. Good landlords, taking good landlords and making them better. That ultimately is going to help everybody. Tenants, landlords, everything. That's our goal at the end of the day. We do have a course. We can help you get to that next level. But if you were like me when I got started, I didn't have any money. There's going to be a huge portion of this that will always be free. Because if you are a good person and you will be a good landlord, and you will take the ideas and tools that Michael and I are going to teach you, and you're going to spread them, and it will be a net good for our whole country and our whole society, there will always be a reason for us to help you 100% for free. If you want to get there a little bit faster and you have a little bit of money to spend, great, we got your back. Again, our goal here is to take you and slice your time to get started down significantly. You can make major changes in 30 days. That's the spirit of this. That's what we're here to do. Listeners, we got your back. Welcome to the 30-day MHP.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to make those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you that Ryan and I will gift you all of the due diligence mistakes that he and I have made over the years for free? What if I also told you that Ryan and I will hop on a 30-minute coaching call to walk through any questions you might have, give you advice, and even do a free live deal review to get you started on your first or next mobile home park acquisition? Just leave us a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and click the link in the show notes to fill out the form and send it to us. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Masterminds, where you'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love seeing you in there. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you soon.